Well, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gillian Hyde, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar all about the Hogan General Employability Report. I imagine that a lot of you listening today probably tend to use the Hogan assessments predominantly in the leadership development space, or perhaps for high-level selection. So I think it's going to be really interesting for us to hear about a very different perspective today, and to learn about how Hogan can be applied to the volume selection process. We're very fortunate to have Ryan Ross here to talk us through this new report. Ryan is the Managing Partner for Global Alliances at Hogan Assessments. I've known Ryan for an extremely long time now, probably since about the late 1990s, I would guess. And he is, of course, an expert on all things Hogan. Just before I hand over to Ryan, I wanted to explain how we're going to handle any questions that you might have today. As you listen to the webinar, if anything occurs to you that you'd like to ask, please could you type your question into the box on the right-hand side of your screen. Hopefully you'll see a kind of dialogue box which is all about the control panel for the webinar, and there's a box for questions. So if you could type your questions in there, then when Ryan finishes up, I'll be choosing 2 or 3 questions from that box to ask him, so he'll be able to answer them for everybody who's listening in. We estimate that the webinar will continue for about 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Ryan.
Why, thank you, Gillian. This is a great opportunity, and I was actually thinking how long it's actually been since we've known each other, and it was actually 1996. And so it's been a wonderful partnership between Hogan and PCL over those years, and just love what it is that we're able to do together along the way. So I'm going to make sure everybody can see my screen here. Is that available, Gillian? Can you see that?
Yes, I can, Ryan.
All right, great. So as Gillian said, Hogan and PCL in general, we're known for a lot of the work that we've done together over the years in leadership development, and the great work that Jeff and Gillian have done around the dark side, and really have become synonymous with the leadership space. What most people don't know is that Hogan actually started in employee selection, or now what we call talent acquisition. And so introducing general employability, and then also other things that we'll be introducing or reintroducing into the market in late fourth quarter and early 2020, from my perspective, starts to put us back at our beginnings, and that is helping organizations make the best decisions when it comes to their talent acquisition and people promotion processes. So what I wanted to do today is just simply walk you through some of the background on why general employability and why we feel this is a good model for entry level and both skilled and unskilled roles, and then walk you through the actual output and talk a little bit about some of the return on investment that organizations that have adopted general employability during our piloting process, some of the things that they've seen in terms of outcomes. With that, we've all asked ourselves, we have to think back actually a number of years to our just getting out of university or out of a technical or trade school, who's going to hire me? And that's the question that thousands and thousands and thousands of people are asking every day. Who will take a chance on me? Who will hire me? Do I have the right qualifications? And part of that is being driven by the fact that we see these headlines across the world in terms of the shortages of talent in some areas and the plethora of talent in others. So as an example, when I was recently in India, I pulled this out of the headlines. Only 18% of engineering grads say or are said to be employable. They have the right technical skills, but perhaps they don't have the right people skills. We're seeing hotel management organizations that we work with, they talk about the crisis that they have. Many are opening up their own graduate training programs so that they can educate the type of people that they need and want versus looking to the general employment market. Some of the surveys that we're seeing from organizations and from research companies are that 34% of applicants across professional level positions are missing basic people skills. 25% appear to lack just the basic drive to come to work and to do a good job. And 15% just don't know how to get started. And so, not that we're addressing the educational issue and what universities and technical schools are preparing graduates for, it's just a matter of the current way and the current trends that we see individuals in the workforce or the potential workforce are lacking a lot of these skills and challenges. The other thing that we know is that unemployment and underemployment is driving a lot of applicants to jobs that they would never have thought about applying to before. And so part of the reason why we started down the research path around general employability was based on client demand. Clients saying that we're receiving for entry-level call center positions, people with MBAs, people with engineering degrees, people with computer science degrees. Because unemployment is so low in parts of the world, you're seeing overeducated individuals just try to get a foot in the door. In other areas, like Asia Pacific, you're finding a plethora of talent that may or may not have the right technical skills or educational background for the jobs that they're applying for as well. And so it really depends, and my point that I want to make here is the use of employability measures has to be specific to the local markets. And so when you're doing a screen-in process where you can be picky and only hire the best, you may want to use a more in-depth assessment process. When you're trying to screen out, or you have an overabundance of applicants or applicants that just don't meet the basic qualifications, using something that identifies and helps you sort through those individuals in a more quick and time-efficient manner is probably more beneficial to the organization. And that's what we're seeing with our client base. We do know that, well, let me back up. Something that we always talk about at Hogan, that the success of any organization depends on the people. And part of the organization's goals and duties and their commitments to their shareholders is to try to get the right people on board. Why? Well, there's a lot of research, a lot of peer reviews research showing that hiring decisions can either impact or positively or negatively the bottom line results in an organization very quickly. We know that those poor hiring decisions cause disengagement, and with engagement being a major topic in the industry right now, hiring the wrong individuals is the quickest way to drive down engagement survey results. We see an increase in turnover. This is individuals both being asked to leave the organization and leaving voluntarily because they just feel like this is a bad fit. We talk about a lot of times in the questions, a lot of times are around millennials. Millennials, one of the characteristics we do see is they're a lot more likely to skip jobs or to leave jobs than their predecessors. The other thing that we know about people that make poor hiring decisions, just overall productivity and being able to hit the ground running at day one on the job versus 6 to 9 months being put on a performance plan before we try to exit them out of the organization. So at Hogan, we really do drive everything around personality because personality underlies our basic characteristics, our behaviors, our actions, the way we react, the way we interact, the things that we do on a daily basis. And as you know, at Hogan, we talk about the you that you know versus the you that we know. And so much like our core assessment tools that we use for leadership development and executive education, our selection tools also focus on those same characteristics of personality, more about what we know about the individual based on years of research than perhaps their own self-perception. The other thing about personality is it gives us a probability of how people will do what they do. So if you think about that from an employment standpoint, the probability of success in using personality is higher than an interview. It's higher than a coin flip. Again, we're adding value or incremental value to the hiring process in a predictive manner. The nice thing also about using personality, and one of the ways that our client organizations are doing so, is it gives us a model in terms of how to coach and develop someone, even at an entry level. Being able to have that initial 10 or 15-day discussion around onboarding or providing them some basic feedback, it really does help the employee and their direct supervisor start to get into a rhythm of talking about performance, talking about development. That's one of the survey results that just came out of a Gallup survey around culture and engagement. That engagement increases by about 7.5% to 8% at the entry-level employee ranks by simply having a first 10 to 15-day discussion with their direct supervisor about areas that they can help coach around behavior and around skills. And so it really does make a difference. And the last thing about personality is it predicts our effectiveness and our willingness to engage over time. And so what we see is certain personality characteristics do drive not only effectiveness, but engagement in the organization. So when we talk about the general hiring process, what we really talk about is the way organizations use assessment and some of the best practices around the use of assessments in everyday organizational life. The first thing that an organization really needs to pay attention to is their applicant flow and what we call attainment costs. And so applicant flow being, do you have a large pool or a small pool? Very straightforward. Attainment cost, organizations often have a hard time measuring. And they oftentimes just think about that as, how much did the ad cost me in Indeed or in an online LinkedIn posting? What they don't think about is actual time from HR in screening and recruiting applicants, your assessment costs, interview costs. If you're using a single hiring manager or you're using a pool of hiring managers, what's the opportunity cost of having them come off the line and actually do an interview with someone who perhaps in the first 4 or 5 minutes of the interview that was scheduled for a half hour, they're saying, why am I talking to this individual? And those are the things that over time add up very quickly, whether it be a very large organization or whether it be a small 10 or 15 person company. Those costs can be detrimental to the overall success of the business. So we think the first critical question that you have to address in using assessment tools is, are you taking the approach of a screen in or a screen out methodology to the hiring process? The other thing that organizations think about are, what are their pre-hire tools? And especially in more regulated environments, the application is a pre-hire tool. The interview is a pre-hire tool. Most people just think of assessment as, say, a skill or a personality test. However, those upfront pieces, whether it be the quick application, the quick interview, those things need to add value as well. Oftentimes that application interview, really it's about that chemistry check, it's about that quick screen, it's about something that is easily done at a low cost. Here in the States, we've had organizations that have gotten even into trouble for screening people based on their LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Snap, whatever it may be, profiles before they even ask them to complete a resume or ask them to have an interview. On the other side, you have assessment tools. And so hopefully you're using something that's well validated, it's reliable, and it measures what it is it says it's measuring. Oftentimes, those things are configured around competency potential. So an organizational's competency model, they're used to unearth blind spots or potential strengths that someone doesn't know about. But more importantly, it's trying to match the individual's characteristics to a specific position or role. So at Hogan, what we do is we talk about the screen in and screen out that I've mentioned. Screening in, it's the best available. Screening out, really looking at criteria. So what are minimum standards? You find the screen in methodologies typically in high stakes positions closer to that final decision, where screen out is going to be your higher volume assessment processes. Oftentimes a screen out strategy with an assessment tool is used in the early stage of a multi-hurdle process. We work with a cellular company here in the United States. They screen roughly 165,000 people a year, which again is a large scale process for them, given that they have 6 recruiters. So what they do is they take a screen out approach and put their different hurdles early in the process that can be automated, that can be fit into their applicant tracking system or their HRIS system, and provide a recommendation that moves someone on to the next level. So if we think about that from a scoring perspective, a screen in, typically you're looking at an overall score, where with a screen out, oftentimes organizations use more of a binary recommendation. Is it recommended or not recommended to move on to the next level? Our transportation clients actually like to use red, yellow, green because it works just like it would with a traffic light system. So what are we seeing in today's market? Well, those that are highly employable and actually are scoring quite well on assessment tools, perhaps they just don't have a lot of experience. So we're seeing that with a lot of our recent graduates. As you saw up front, 22% of Indian graduates with engineering degrees aren't employable. And it's not necessarily because they don't have the right skills, it's rather they don't have the right personal characteristics. Although much of that blame can be put on the growing economy and the low unemployment rates, what we also see is a persistent group of just unemployed individuals. And I don't necessarily like the word, but it is something that's been published, and that is there are people that are unemployable, but yet they keep coming around in the job pools. Part of the reason why they're unemployable is they haven't had that opportunity for personal development. They haven't had those conversations with individuals helping them understand what are their strengths and challenges. And that's something that we hope with this model can start to have people can start to have a discussion with those individuals. So let me talk briefly about the model. The first characteristic that we've identified is what we call people skills. People skills is about working well with others. It's being cooperative, considerate, individuals that can work as part of a team or work across different customer groups. So I think about customer service representatives or consultants or account managers, being able to interact with a wide variety of people regardless of the amount of stress and pressure that they're under. Last time that I was at the airport, EasyJet was having a little trouble. And if you stand at the counter, you can tell those customer service agents that have good people skills versus those who probably should be maybe under the airport working in baggage claim. The second characteristic is what we call learning skills. And so learning skills is how quickly will a person pick up the necessary characteristics or skills to do the job. So it's really about the essential job functions and a person's willingness to keep up to date and try new things and or restructure their world of work based on what's being changed around them. And then the third characteristic is what we call work ethic. Work ethic's about being dependable, taking instructions, working hard, trying every time to produce high quality results in a timely fashion. What's interesting is if you look back around across the history of, say, competency model development, work ethic has always been historically a critical competency for every job. And I don't think you could find one role where work ethic wouldn't be something that an employer would say is important. So when we take these three characteristics and put them together, what we have is people skills, learning skills, and work ethic. And then we're calculating an overall what we call general employability score. What's interesting is as we've tested this model over the last 18 months in the marketplace, you find different jobs in different industries require more or less of these three competencies. And so it may be that someone who is not in a customer-facing role, take one of our financial services clients, they have individuals that are account operators and or what they call lockbox associates, behind the scenes processing payments. So income hundreds of thousands of envelopes with checks and money orders or online payments. They rarely talk to a customer. So for them, people skills isn't the critical characteristic. However, learning skills and work ethic, given that they're adding new accounts that they process for on a daily basis, is important. So an organization understanding the role is still important, but at the same point, providing them with a standardized output was our real goal. So before we talk about the actual output, what are some of the uses? Why do organizations start, or why are organizations starting to use general employability? One is it's helping them make smarter and faster decisions based on good validated personality information. Second is it's streamlining their applicant flow. So being able to not only rank, but also rate applicants is allowing their recruiters and their HR managers to process people in a more streamlined, systematic way. The third thing is we're able to provide a modified version of our core personality inventory. So the assessment that drives general employability is the HPI, or the Hogan Personality Inventory. For organizations that are doing basic entry-level screening, oftentimes they're concerned about the time of assessment. And so what we've done is we've reduced the number of items to make the HPI roughly a 6 to 7 minute assessment to be able to score general employability. We're also able to deliver that in 46 different languages. And so the years and years of research and adaptation and localization is still available in a shortened assessment just for this purpose. So the actual assessment itself, we've tried to keep it as simple as possible. The actual assessment provides you with, as you can see here, an overall score across five levels, a fit recommendation, and then information about what we're calling the sub-competencies or sub-skills of people skills, leadership, or work ethic. We've tried to simplify this as well to where we can directly feed these results using an API into an HRIS or an applicant tracking system, so that a recruiter doesn't even have to look at a Hogan report. Rather, they can see the results directly in their applicant dashboard through their system the organization currently uses. The other thing that we've done is we've provided 3 interview questions, or what we call interviewing for context, to where an individual could take and just ask a question based on where the applicant scores fall. So again, try to make it very simple, very straightforward, and very intuitive. To dig in just a little bit, there's different features of the report. One of the things that we also got feedback on along the way from the organizations is, where should we start? What should be the bar, or what should be the target score? So what we've done is we've actually normed the average individual competencies and the overall percentile score. And so what we find is less than 20% of the population scores in the 0 to 19% as an example, where that the dark green, or the far to the right, or the high fit is what I call it, it's going to be 80 to 100%. So again, it's trying to make it more of a standardized output, but drawing upon our years of setting cut scores or benchmarks to help us do that. In terms of the other scales, the people, learning, and work ethic, what you could say is that someone who scores in the low range on people skills is going to be blunt and direct, where those scoring in the middle range to the high range are going to be more pleasant and rewarding. We did have the request, and we've already made one product modification. Some of our recruiting companies, what they wanted us to do was to not provide the actual numeric values. They were worried about a hiring manager trying to differentiate too much between, say, a 60 and a 62, where we know from norm-based scoring that could simply be a 1 raw score point difference. So we do have the ability to suppress the actual numeric values within the 3 characteristics. The other thing that we've done is we've provided text that's driven off of the person's scores. So low scores, average scores, and high scores. Instead of just displaying the text for that specific score, we chose in this report to actually bold the text that fits for the score that's displayed on the screen. We did that because oftentimes you find, again, recruiters or hiring managers that don't have a lot of experience with assessment. They just have the question, well, I wonder what a low score looks like. I wonder what a high score looks like. This provides them the ability to see that on a regular basis, to where as they start to use the assessment process more frequently, they're very quickly able to differentiate the different zones or scores, if you will. And then finally, on the fit recommendation, what we did was we said from all of our validation data, looking at scores on the overall score and job performance data, those that score below the 20th percent are the individuals who reliably and consistently are in the bottom quartile of job performance data across a multitude of industries. And so that's where we've decided to set our recommendation of should this person move forward in the hiring process or not. The other thing, because it's driven off of the core Hogan personality inventory, we kept and have maintained the built-in validity scale. So looking at just unpredictable or unreliable scoring patterns, or individuals who are trying to, just manipulate the assessment in one way or another, there is the potential that a red box would pop up in the fit recommendation that does say this report is not valid and not interpretable. So if the validity scale is tripped, you won't actually receive a recommendation on the report as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, just to give you a snapshot if the other screen wasn't large enough, some example interviewing questions or interviewing for context. What we've tried to do is to keep these at a behaviorally focused level. We did not feel like, though, going into providing behavioral ranking scales or anchors would be very beneficial, given that organizations these days tend to have a set number of interview questions that they're asking as well. What we hoped was that these questions could either be used directly or would help a hiring manager or recruiter start to think about, oh, we have some questions in our on our bar scales or in our targeted selection package that really I should focus on given the actual assessment results. And finally, as I mentioned, you have the ability, if you're an existing user with the Hogan tools, you could use the full Hogan personality inventory, or you could use the shortened assessment. Organizations that have used the shortened assessment, frankly, the challenge they run into is 6 months. Fast forward 6 months from hiring an individual, that individual is now eligible to post, say, for a supervisor role with, let's just use the customer contact center example. At that point, they don't have a full data set. So if the organization's also using Hogan for looking at talent promotion, the individual is going to need to go in and reassess if they have a full standard Hogan profile set up for that supervisor role. Some organizations don't mind that approach, because at that point the incumbent trying to promote feels like they're given a fair shake. Other times organizations just say, you know what, because of the way we use assessment throughout all of our hiring and talent management processes, let's go ahead and ask them to, instead of spending 6 to 7 minutes, spend 10 to 12 minutes and just get all the data we might need for the future. Because I know some of you are more technical on the call, a couple of things about integrations. As I mentioned, we can integrate with any HRIS or applicant tracking system, and we can do that in the front end to launch the assessments, or in the back end to pull those data and the reports directly back into your HRIS systems. And then for the side calls on the call, what are some of the things that we've done behind the scenes? This model and all the requisite technical information was driven by really looking at meta-analysis across all of our standard job families. So across several hundred different jobs within job families with thousands of participants, what we were doing was really modeling what's the best general approach for overall employability, regardless if that was in an administrative and clerical role, whether that was in a truck driver or lorry driver role, down to someone who's doing basic computer desktop support within an office environment. So we really have tried to make this as broad and general as possible. Just real quickly, I thought I'd show you a couple of examples of where we're seeing the impact of using general employability. We work with several police forces across the United States, and actually this was also scaled at the national level. And what we were looking at was, what are performance implications of hiring people that have higher scores on overall employability? And what you see here is just some of the recent data that we've collected. For example, people with higher scores have 45 fewer disciplinary actions and take 43% less leave time. That disciplinary actions is huge for this police force, because most of those are being out of policy. And so interacting with a citizen and not following policy, but taking one's own approach, oftentimes leads to the largest number of citizen complaints, which then, if you watch American news, ends up on the 6 o'clock news hour on CNN. And so it really helped them understand within the police communication officers, what are those interpersonal conflicts? What are those interpersonal relations they're having? Are they working hard to build community policing versus taking more of an individualistic approach? I mentioned some of our financial services clients, bank tellers, people that are in that average to higher score on employability. They're the ones who are getting the customer accommodations. They're getting the customer service cards turned in for them, versus the lower scoring individuals oftentimes are seen as just making a transaction. With the focus that most organizations now have on brand awareness and being a brand ambassador, you want people working with your customers that are constantly going to show and display that customer focus. When you think about people out of sales and customer support roles, this was a telephone sales representative job, not the easiest role in the world. Much like in the UK and elsewhere, telemarketers is what we typically call them versus telephone sales reps. Again, showing that individuals that are higher on employability are more likely to be rated as interpersonally skilled. Individuals who are going to perform higher during their 6 months probation, be able to work better as part of a team. The other thing you see is an increase in sales per hour, and that's going to be just based on building relationships. I can go on and on. We've got a lot of different examples, but what I would say is, if you're in a specific industry or you have a specific targeted role, just reach out to PCL. They have complete access to all of our archives, and they're able to provide you with the type of ROI information or the type of validity information that you might need to feel comfortable using the assessment. So let me conclude with this. We know personality drives performance. We know that personality impacts an individual's success in the organization. We've all known a lot of people throughout our lives, probably some personal friends, that are the smartest people in the world we know, but they just can't keep a job. And so bright and skilled people can still be unemployable, and it's based on their people skills, learning skills, and work ethic that oftentimes makes the difference between being employable and not. And so what we hope is, and what we've seen actually, is that giving organizations a quick, easy to use tool actually is helping them make better people decisions at that lower level and entry level point in their organization. With that, I'll stop, and Gillian, I'm sure you've got some questions. Happy to answer anything about general employability or selection in general.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. That was really interesting, and great to have so many examples actually of how you've applied the report, and in terms of actually predicting successful outcomes. I do have some questions, but I see we have one question from one of our attendees on the webinar. So I don't know, Ryan, if you have access to this question as well, but anyway, if I read it out. So Victoria would like to know a bit more about the FIT score. So I know you talked about the overall FIT score, but you've also talked about the three areas. You look at those sometimes separately when you look at validity studies. But Victoria is saying, is this an overall score across all three model elements, calculated for each organisation based on their validation data, or is it at the sector level? The latter, how do you organisations are correctly mapping their roles onto your job families? I'm assuming this is a very generic kind of metric.
It is. Yes, the basic, what I would call general approach to employability is an overarching model. And so we have not gone in and created a specific process for an organization to quickly say we only want people in that above average range, from say a list of occupations or a list of specific job families. It is a generally applied model. That said, just like everything we've done in the selection space, we work, and we can do it very quickly, work with an organization to map their roles or their jobs to the general employability archive or the research database to be able to say, oh, again, you're talking about bank tellers. Here is what we specifically see in bank tellers across the 42 validation studies that we have. We also have organizations that are in high risk, well, let's call it high risk industries, as in, at least here in the US, they've been subject to some sort of consent decree or employee action based on previously not doing things correctly. And so for them, they need to do a local validation study. And again, we can very quickly and effortlessly do that with the organization to be even more specific in the ranges or the specific profile, if you will, across an overall score or the subcomponent scores.
Do you mean then that the measure would be the same? So you still be measuring those three areas, the people skills, the work ethic, and so on, but that you would be setting the cutoffs at the moment, like for your overall fit, you're really just recommending screening at the bottom 20%.
Correct.
Yeah. But if you were looking to align it with some local validation, you're not talking about completely changing the report, are you? You're looking at giving sort of different recommendations for cut scores and or whether, say, people skills is more important than work ethic.
Correct, Gillian. And so as an example, I have a transportation client that I've worked with for several decades, and they wanted to move to something that was more simplified than what they were doing. And they also were building out 16 new warehouses across the southeast part of the country. And so they had massive hiring needs. And what they wanted was very quick and easy from an implementation standpoint for their recruiters and hiring managers. We had used this as part of a pilot project. So we had gathered performance data and assessment data. We were able to very quickly look to see that lift truck operators, so people driving forklifts and loading up lorries, what we saw was that their basic screen out, or people that we knew statistically were going to not be high performers, that was at about I think it was the 35th percentile on the overall score. And so what we did is we didn't change the report, but what they did in their process flow was said people that are below the 35th percentile in terms of that overall score, we're going to pass on for now. We're just going to set them aside. Okay. And then they pursued any of those above the 35th. The other thing that they did is that they saw that learning skills was not a key differentiator in terms of performance for them, because you either had your lift truck certification, meaning you had passed a basic OSHA test, or you didn't. But that job really wasn't changing, and there wasn't a lot of things that they needed to, quote unquote, keep up to date or be curious about. And so they would take people that were on the lower range of learning skill, as long as the people skill and the work ethic met their minimum criteria. Of course, we have other organizations that are hiring maybe 5 to 10 people a year across a lot of different entry-level type roles, clerical positions, support staff. And for them, the process of creating a specific profile for their organization is just prohibitive. And so we wanted to be able to provide them with a basic model that they could be comfortable with and had good science behind it.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Ryan. And hopefully, Victoria, that's answered your question. I had one more question myself, and that was just to check in about the level of accreditation, certification required to access this report from your clients.
So for us, with the shortened version, what we've done is we've provided two different different resources for the clients to actually be able to use this on their own without full accreditation. If they're using the full form of the HPI, then what we're doing is continuing with our traditional accreditation standards, just because at that point they have access to other output, which would have scale or subscale data. And I know in some of the markets in which we operate and we have partners, there's other restrictions that are placed on by different regulating bodies. But from our global perspective, general employability was not intended to be a very restrictive type output just based on the way that we have configured the information and the fact that you can't drill down into the traditional personality scales and subscales as a basic user.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really great to hear. And also, yeah, I mean, I assumed that maybe that would be the case because yes, people are using the short form of the HPI in this format. Obviously, the interpretation is done for them, and
Right.
it has a very clear output. It has a very clear way of using what comes out of the report.
Exactly.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions from our audience today. So I would just like to finish up by saying thanks again, Ryan. It's really good to have that explained to us. I think we all receive information from various people that we buy services from about new things and new updates. And there's nothing like actually listening to somebody who knows a lot about the particular product or service to talk us through to really understand what that's all about. And clearly, yes, this is a very different kind of way of using Hogan to the way that a lot of our clients currently use it. But I'm sure that, given, as you say, employability, there are an awful lot of people out there maybe looking to try something different and to move jobs more often because there are lots of jobs out there. But the basic requirement of employers to screen out those people who are just going to be at least kind of good organisational citizens, get the job done, get their heads down and get on with things is extremely important and extremely valuable to them. So I can see this report sitting very nicely in that space.
Right.
So, yeah, so thanks again, Ryan.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And again, just really enjoy the continued support of PCL and everything that you guys have done over the years. And I would encourage anybody that's on the phone, anytime you've got questions, not only about Hogan but about psychological assessment in general. Jeff and Gillian are the #1 resources in your market, and so we just can't say how much we really appreciate and enjoy working with them because of the professional standards that they have.
Right, well, we appreciate that, Ryan, and of course, similarly, we thoroughly enjoy working with Hogan, as we believe, your assessments are absolutely the #1 products out there on the market with all that research behind them, and we've gained an awful lot of knowledge and insight, and of course, lots of thanks to Bob and Joyce Hogan for their clarity of thinking.
Absolutely.
Area. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's everything for today. But
All right.
some more webinars in the future because I think this is a really great model in order to keep our Hogan clients up to date on things that are happening with all things coming out of Hogan assessments. So thanks again, and thank you very much to everybody for tuning in to this webinar. Hope that you found it useful. Okay, so bye-bye for now.
All right, cheers.